And welcome everybody to another episode of the BowDivas. Today we have a very special guest. She began shooting in the mid-90s because of her love for the outdoors and hunting. She then caught the 3D bug and started competing at local 3Ds, and by 1998 she started participating at a national level at ASA, IBO, and NFAA events. She went on to have multiple wins and podium finishes at ASA and IBO events. Her prior career started in teaching, where she was an 8th grade math teacher and found her way into NASP, National Archery in Schools program. She was the Kentucky NASP state coordinator for 10 years and a Matthews Pro staff since 1999. Currently, she is the executive director for the Scholastic 3D Archery Organization, also known as S3DA, which has skyrocketed in growth under her direction and the direction of all the awesome members and volunteers. We are very excited to get a little bit of her time. Please welcome Jennie Richardson. Hey, Jennie, can you hear us okay?
I hear you fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. You know, you've had a big impact with the S3DA, and that's kind of a big deal right now, but we'd love to hear a little bit about your early days in archery, how you got started, kind of how you got into the sport and what it's kind of meant to you and your family.
Okay, great. Actually, my history in the sport is kind of unique. The first time I remember shooting a bow, I actually was shooting a small wooden bow that my grandfather made for me out of trot line staging, and it was literally a little self bow, and I was probably 4.5 years old. Oh. And he allowed me to shoot it in the house because I was recovering from an open heart surgery. And my grandmother didn't really appreciate me shooting the homemade arrows and slinging arrows at the couch, but my grandfather, I couldn't run and play and do what my brothers and sister and my first cousins was doing, and he found a way to entertain me, and I actually loved it. And from the time I was 4.5 until I got involved in organized softball and basketball, anytime I had an opportunity to pick up one of the self bows that he had made me, I would fling arrows just because it was something I enjoyed doing.
Wow.
And I can remember some of my first hunting experiences with my grandfather. He was carrying the 12-gauge shotgun, and I was carrying my little bow, and he was telling me how to be quiet and teaching me how to be quiet. And we played the pebble game where we started out with an equal number, and when we made a noise, whoever made the noise had to give up a little pebble. And anyway, my grandfather was extremely instrumental in me becoming the hunter that I was. And he also bought me my first shotgun, and that I was able to harvest several squirrels and rabbits with. And so that was pretty much when I started to organize sports. I continued to hunt with a gun, but I really didn't have the time nor the resources to get involved in archery or the people to guide me in that direction at that time. And in 1986, my husband started bow hunting, and I've always been a competitive person, and I told him that if he could bow hunt, so could I. I needed a bow. So for Christmas in 1986, I got my first bow. It was a PSE US Spirit, and I used that bow for 7 years. And I killed a lot of deer with it. I missed a lot of them initially because I really didn't know what I was doing, but I had a large amount of fun. And our family have always been, and our extended family has always been involved in hunting and fishing and bow hunting and just being outdoors and camping and enjoying the time as an extended family. And some of the best memories that I have, of my sons as youngsters was the times that my husband and I were debating on who, we were trading out who was going to take the kids to the tree stand or the ground blind. Well, not the tree stand, but to the ground blind with them that day. And we would literally trade out. So I've been blessed to have a wonderful husband that's understanding and was willing to share his love of the outdoors and bow hunting and hunting and fishing with his family. So we've really been blessed.
Now, do your boys still
hunting years?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just curious. Do your boys still are they pretty active hunters still?
You have no idea. My oldest son is 34, and my youngest son is 32, and they still go hunting and fishing with mom and dad, and their spouses and girlfriends go. And I mean, it's still a family experience. And
that's awesome.
When I'm talking to young people that's getting involved in the sport, I tell them how important it is to get their entire family involved because families that hunt and fish together have the tendency to stay together. And if I look at other people that's my age, I mean, what 33, 34-year-old or 32, 34-year-old son is going to want to go do things with mom and dad, you know, and I can say that mine does because they enjoy hunting and fishing, but there's very few other things we do together.
Yeah.
But I'm really proud of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear.
So that's how I got involved in just the hunting in general. I was a bow hunter from 1987 until I started competing in archery in 1998. 1998 was my first year in competition archery.
Cool. Well, we're interested in hearing about how you became the Kentucky NAF state coordinator and what you did as a state coordinator.
You know, that of all the things, I've been blessed to have been involved in a lot of neat things in my life, and that's one of the best things I've ever been involved in. When we were, when I started shooting competitive in '98, the principal at the school where I taught, he had a archery club that he had started the year before, and my youngest son Justin happened to show up for that class, and I was still coaching softball, high school softball at that time, and I'll never forget it. I drove around the carousel to pick him up in my truck, and my youngest son, Justin, was born with a congenital heart defect, and he currently, at 32 now, he has an artificial aorta, and
wow.
it's, you know, he's always had a challenge medically, but shooting a bow and fishing and some of the outdoor sports is something that he never had any trouble with. And I'll never forget that day to drive around and pick him up as a 7th grader, and even to this day, it's hard not to get the tears flowing because that was the first time that he had ever stayed after school for any kind of activity because he couldn't do any of the ball sports.
Yeah.
And he got in the truck, and for a kid and for parents that have kids with disabilities or, you know, unique situations, it's kind of tough. And so the peer acceptance was not as high for him, and there's some other issues associated with that. Well, he gets in the truck, and all the way home, he would not shut up. It was, Mom, they couldn't believe my bow. They couldn't believe my arrows. They wanted to see my release, and it was yada, 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 all the way home. And I was so proud that he had this opportunity. And to this day, at his age, he still has his friends that was part of the archery club back in those days,
right,
that contact him whenever they are interested in what's the newest current trend in archery. And so for him, he found the peer acceptance that all kids desperately need, and a sense of belonging to a group. And then you were asking me, how did I get involved in NASP? Well, in '98, I started shooting competitively, and I won. I should remember this, but I don't. I think it was like the first 3 out of 4 tournaments. And Matthews actually added me to their national staff, and I received a free bow and some free shirts. And you were talking to a very happy camper. I was excited, and Sherlock Archery added me to their staff, as did Easton and several different companies. And then, so that was in '98, my first year ever competing. In '99, because I had won the Cabela's World Championship and the ASA Championship, I had to transition into the pro class. That's just the natural progression for what happens. And so I was added to several different pro staff in '99. And then I was also helping Coach Pruitt, our principal at the school where I taught. I was helping him with the archery club. I started helping him in '98. I continued in '98. We had 25 kids. In '99, that number had jumped up to 75. Well, Matt McPherson had asked me if I would actually go to the U.S. Congressional Sportsman's Caucus and present this program we were doing at my school. What made our program really unique is it was not just an after-school program. I was a team leader, and I had helped my science, language arts, history, and then in my math class and the reading teacher come up with lesson plans that we could teach an archery unit during the regular school day. Whereas the kids would go through our respective classes, they would have some type of archery component. And then in the physical education part, they would go outside and shoot archery. And then we were doing the after-school program. So anyway, it was exciting, and we presented this program, and then that was in '99. 2000, the number had jumped up to 150, actually 152. And then in 2001.
In the single school, or did you bring in some additional schools?
No, it was just in that single school, and we had a school population of 750
I was
kids.
Say,
and
that's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
My last year there, we actually had 2 archery shops that were closing down in the afternoons on Tuesday, Thursday, and they would come and help us with this program. And there were several staff people. It was not just me. It was a community effort. And we would divide the kids up into groups. One group may be learning about camouflage, and one may be learning about broadheads, and one making turkey calls. And so we were trying to come up with individual stations so that we could meet the needs of 200-plus kids that was wanting to stay after school.
Wow.
Right. So this was the start of NASP? Is that what you're...
No, that's a good question, because on August 26th, our school actually started that year on August 5th, and we already had all these kids lined up. And there was and we started our archery program right off the bat. On August 26th, it was on a Sunday, 2001, there was a large article that the Lexington Herald-Leader had done about the archery program at my school, and they had me on the feature cover. It was a one-page full ad from Lexington Herald. It's really cool because you could see me, the teacher, standing in front of a group of students that's sitting in chairs, and I'm holding a Genesis bow that I'd put a sight on, and then we had pictures of the kids shooting outside, and just a really great article. Well, the Department of Fish and Wildlife had sent me actually, Roy Grimes from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, he was the deputy commissioner at that time, and Roy is currently the president and CEO of NASP right now. Roy had called me at 1 o'clock. I'll never forget it. 1 o'clock, right when my 5th period class was coming into the school. And he explained who he was and what he wanted to talk about. And I asked if I could call him back at 3 o'clock. And I called him back at 3. And he told me what he wanted. And as soon as I hung up, I literally called Matt McPherson on his personal cell phone and told him what had happened. Matt told me to call Kevin Stay, who was the president of Genesis, and we had our first organizational meeting at the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife in October. And that call, the article was on August 26th on Sunday, and I had the call for Roy on September the 1st. And then we had our first meeting at Frankfurt with Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Education in October.
Right.
We had an organizational meeting for the Kentucky Archery in the Schools program in November, and in December, we trained our first teachers in Kentucky on March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of 2002. And between December and March, I had given up my teaching job in the middle of a school year. My last day with the kids was on January the 18th. That was the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life, because the group of kids that was in my area were kids, the vast majority of them were parent requests to be in that area. And I loved my teaching job, and I would go back. If my career changed tomorrow, I would automatically go back to the teaching field, because I absolutely loved it. And but I felt like, and I had other people telling me that we would be able to make a bigger difference for something that I loved and something I was passionate about, and something that had made a major difference in my family, not just with the family involvement and engagement with each other, but also with my youngest son, that was able to do something, with his family that he would not have been able to do had we not been involved in the outdoors. And so anyway, that's how I got the job at Fish and Wildlife. And then, do you have questions?
No, I was just thinking about how many children you've touched their lives just from that little start. How many kids have learned archery just because of you?
Yeah, Jenny. Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's awesome.
What was pretty amazing is my school system allowed me to I actually took an amended contract, which allowed me to deduct 15 days without pay. And on Friday, and I had to give them my travel schedule for the ASA, IBO, and NFAA tournaments in Cabela's, because back in those days I was shooting in Cabela's. And I gave them a list of the tournaments I was going to compete in. Well, the kids knew when I was going to be gone. We had a sub already figured out. And anyway, the first thing they wanted to know was how I'd done. I mean, Monday morning there would be 100 kids surrounding me wanting to know how I'd done at the different events. And I was able to bring in some, the events from the different states. The kids was actually sharing my journey, and it was pretty exciting just when I was there, and it was a pretty neat thing to be involved in. And the unique thing is, numerous of those kids are now in their late 30s, early 40s, and
Right.
they are still involved in archery. And more importantly, many of them have been able to pass on the mentoring aspect that my husband and I did. And to make that make sense, when I was doing this archery program at our school, every day that the kids was there, we had a sign-in sheet, and then they had a little tag that they would fill their names out, drop it in a bucket, or it was actually a box. And at the end of the year, we would draw out 2 names, and those 2 students got to go on a weekend bow hunt with my husband and I and our family, our 2 sons.
Wow, that's cool.
And many of these kids, you know, we helped them get outfitted. We made sure they had camouflage. And then the unique thing about it is their parents were not bow hunters. And I don't know how we were able to do that. It was just a random draw. And some of those kids still bow hunt. As a matter of fact, one of the young men I helped him get set up in a new bow last year, and he'll be 40 this year. So
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it's just kind of cool. And that's just from our school. And then with the archery in the schools, that program, we designed it, and I was involved at the very beginning. And that program was designed to be a physical education program and a basic introduction to archery.
Right, the NASP.
And we were going to teach it during the NASP program.
Right.
But back in those days, it was called the Kentucky Archery in the Schools program. It did not become NASP until 2003.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't.
And the Kentucky...
I was going to say,
Okay.
I wasn't super familiar with even the origins of NASP, but now you're just kind of bringing it all up now. Because actually, Julie here, didn't you run NASP in your school?
I did. I actually helped start it with our PE teacher at Shawnee Mound, which was a school that I had worked at. And then
Right.
when I came to Hardin, I eventually started one there, too.
Right.
That's cool. What state are you from, Julie?
Missouri.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember Missouri got on board. That's awesome.
Yes.
Well, in the Kentucky program, there was a lot of things that was happening with that, and during the early days, we actually taught the level 1 class for USA Archery, and actually it was just called level NADA, the National Archery Development Association, and we taught the level 1 class, and I had to become a level 2 certified instructor, and Rob White, an Olympic gold medalist, and Lloyd Brown actually did, one of the Olympic coaches did those trainings for us in Kentucky to get Roy Grimes, myself, and about a half a dozen other Fish and Wildlife employees up to speed.
Right.
And then after that, my job in Kentucky, starting on my official job began on February the 1st. My job was to get as many schools as we could possibly get, as quick as we could get them. And the Department of Education thought that we would have 120 schools in the maximum lifetime of the sport.
Right.
We were in over 120 in 13 months.
Right. I figured
and it was such a soft sell for me because I had already been doing an archery program in my school, and I was working in the state with the Department of Education as a math specialist and training other math teachers. And when I was able to bring in the educational component and explain to them the difference, and then explain even more importantly the peer acceptance, the on-task performance, the parental involvement, and that was another big thing. We had students coming to our school. Parents were coming to our school to help with the after-school program that had never been involved in any aspect of the after-school program at all. And so a teacher talking to other teachers, I could sell it, and I was selling a great product that I still believe in.
Oh yeah.
And then I continued to work in that program, and in 2006, I guess, I kind of noticed there were a lot of kids not transitioning out of the Genesis bow. And when we designed the program, it was meant to be an introduction, and we were going to guide kids to target archery, 3D archery, traditional archery, Olympic archery, and bow hunting.
Right.
And then what I found is it becomes so competitive that a lot of our coaches and parents, they actually didn't want the kids to transition away from the Genesis bow because it would mess up their Genesis game, and there was so much pressure put on them. And I understand that. I really do. But I was able to also have principals and superintendents that were calling me and saying, Jennie, we've got 200 kids trying out, and we have 440 kids in our school. And we're only going to keep 24 kids, at the very most 28. But if we only keep 24, that means that we've got 176 upset kids that's not happy, and multiply that times 2 for the number of parents that's not happy with our school and our small community. And then you can multiply that times 6. That would include all the grandparents and the parents. And so they were asking me if I could come to their facility and train their teachers how to do a traditional bow hunting class, teach the teachers how to do a 3D, a target archery where the kids were shooting 5 spots or beta spots, and how to do a bow hunting component, and even the Olympic archery. And I had some superintendents that said they were interested in doing NASP in addition to these 5 other disciplines of archery.
Right.
And my job at Fish and Wildlife by that time had become so stressed because by 2000, and I'm going to fast speed you up to, in 2011, we had 1,275 active schools in Kentucky.
Wow.
And we started losing some of those schools, and we had some of those schools that literally started dropping off, and the reason they were dropping off is they couldn't meet the needs of all of the students that wanted to play. Mm-hmm. And it was and a lot of people didn't understand that. They said, well, every kid should be given an opportunity. If they want to shoot, they should be given an opportunity. Well, you've got to look at a school setting, and you've got a limited amount of time that you can use the gym. You've got a limited number of volunteers, and then you've got a limited amount of resources to be able to transport the kids to the various events.
Right.
And so it comes down to facility, volunteers, and money, and that's why a lot of our schools decided that it may not have been worth that, and that's unfortunate. And whenever I was seeing that these kids, really did want to transition, and there was a need for it, because if you have, and my goal when we started this program, I wanted to capture the 176 that didn't make the team.
Right.
I wanted those kids so that we could put a release in their hand and a compound bow and sights, or give them a traditional bow with some arrows and let them try a different game.
So, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm confused. So the NASP program in the school, they actually had to try to be on the team. Am I correct on that? Or it wasn't just like anybody who shows up can play. It was, they had to qualify?
I think because the limited space and time.
Right? Is that right?
Okay, well, let me go back. The in-school part with the PE program, that's all-inclusive. Anybody that could do the program.
Okay.
I
see. Okay.
But then the after-school program that the schools are going to, that are competing for their regional and state tournaments and the national tournaments, that's a specialized group of individuals.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a school and you're teaching the program to, and I'll give you an example, my hometown school is one of the pilot schools, and they don't have an active program right now. They have 750 kids, and of the 750, there would easily be 200 plus that would want to do the after-school program. And it's just, sometimes it's just a little bit easier.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that does.
And the program was designed as an introduction in physical education, and it does. And that program is awesome. It's beautiful. The competitive part was the part that kind of, I'm going to say the competitive part was what drove the program to be what it is today. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it grew so fast that I'm not so sure that any of us were ready for that.
Right.
And there may be some people that's in NASP now that would have a different opinion, but when it all comes right down to it, you're looking at facility, because the program is designed to be done in a gymnasium, and you have to have volunteers, and then you've got to have money that's going to be able to promote the program.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense now. Sorry, I was just confused about. I know I had one other question too. You alluded a little earlier to about your coaching level. I think I saw somewhere that you were a level 4 coach. Is that correct, or do you still have?
That's correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit, did you get into the coaching certifications through NASP also, or?
Yes, and not really. See, the NASP program And as we were teaching, I had to teach the level 2s. USA Archery worked with me one-on-one to get me up to a 2.5. A 2.5 back in those days could actually teach the level 2s.
Okay.
And as I was training other state coordinators and people and regional coordinators within Kentucky, I needed to be able to give them that level 2 certification. And then later, we developed our own program in NASP that actually happened in 2005. Tim Strickland, Lloyd Burns, and I were working on it and came up with the first NASP curriculum. And so therefore, the USA Archery was not as important in regards to our training because everybody was using their own NASP training.
Right.
But I was given an opportunity to attend at Colorado Springs, the Olympic Training Center, and literally work with a group of people that was considered regional coaches in the United States. Mm-hmm. And it was because of my experience as a professional archer and then my experience in NASP and how that they were really trying to figure out a niche that they would be able to transition the NASP kids into USA Archery, JOAD, and other disciplines of archery, because during that time they had noticed that the kids really wasn't transitioning.
Yeah, they were falling off, basically, is what you're saying. There wasn't a good way to move.
Yeah, all the archery organizations would love to be as successful as NASP is, and NASP has done a phenomenal job with the number of students that they have had involved in the program, and the number of coaches and teachers, and it's really an amazing deal, and so people were trying to figure out a way to transition the kids from the Genesis bow into a bow that they could use for the rest of their lives, or a sport they could use for the rest of their lives. And that was one of the reasons I was invited. I got my level 3 there in 2006, and then in 2009, I was asked to go to the level 4 class in Indianapolis that the Olympic coach, Coach Lee, was putting on. And for numerous reasons, that was the most difficult thing I think I've ever done in my life. Mm. First of all, I found out 2 weeks prior that I was going to have to give up my Kentucky rut from November the 6th to the 13th. I had to be in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then I found out that it was going to be from Sunday afternoon, beginning at 1 o'clock, until the following Sunday at 1 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
And we were working literally from 7:30 in the morning until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and then we had homework we had to do when we got back to our rooms.
Good grief.
and I tell everybody it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. I mean, it's equivalent to some of the graduate classes that
That's exactly what I was thinking. Cramming for the end of before graduation.
Right, and I was actually working with, and our entire group was working with Jacob Wuki and Jake Kaminsky, and they were they were on the Olympic team at the time. And it was pretty unique. Jacob Wuki was assigned to me, and I'll never forget the day that I decided I was going to take my elastic band and go to my room and practice on the mirror in my room instead of down in the big session. And the phone in my room rang, and I said, "Hello?" He said, "Miss Jennie, this is Jacob." Naturally, I said, "Hey, Jacob, how's it going?" He said, "You really need to come back down here. I've got to watch you practice." And here I am, rolling my eyes, saying, "Okay, I'll be right there." And I hung up, and he was laughing about it later. But it was a really tough course, and I learned a tremendous amount. And that was when they were really first starting to implement the MTS system, the National Training System that's endorsed by USA Archery right now.
Uh-huh. Okay. That makes sense. So you were even one of the first, I guess, group or crop of level 4s. Is that correct, or?
No. That the first group of level 4s would have. There's been level 4s and 5s for years. But I would, in the first group of the ones that has the MTS system at the end, you'll have to see level 4 MTS. Those probably came through in 2007 and 8. I'm not 100% sure. And I didn't have the opportunity during those years to actually complete the level 4.
Right.
But I did it in 2009.
Well, we also want to hear a little bit about the S3DA and how that came about, how it got started. We want to hear about that a little bit.
All right.
We want to hear it a lot.
Is this your new little baby?
It really is, and I'm basically a mother hen, and I take a lot of pride in the things that I have been involved in, and I feel like that the NAS program may have been one of the best things I've been involved in because of the vast number of kids being introduced to the sport, but being able to take those kids that have had the introduction and show them a path that they can use our sport for the rest of their lives, whether it be target archery or bow hunting or bow fishing. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that completes the circle for us. It all started in 2008 when I met with Mike Terrell, the owner of ASA, and I told him, I said, Mike, we have a ton of kids that's not making their after-school NAS team. Mm. I said, we need to come up with something. And he looked at me and he says, all right. And we didn't do anything. And then in 2009, same thing. And he said, all right. Well, in 2011, and it was around December, I met with he and his wife, Lorraine, at their home in Marietta, Georgia. And I said, Mike, we've got to do something. So we scheduled and he came up with the name Scholastic 3D. We scheduled a Scholastic 3D tournament in conjunction with the London, Kentucky tournament, the ASA Pro-Am in London, Kentucky. And that first event, I was very limited on how I could publicize and advertise this because I was working for Fish and Wildlife.
Okay.
And I was still the state coordinator of the National Archery in Schools program.
Oh.
And I was also a Matthews Pro staff, so there was all kinds of lines I had to walk and make sure that what I was doing for that event was on my own time and my professional time instead of state time. And we ended up having, I think, 71 kids from 21 schools. And for the first time out of the gate, I was pretty pleased with it.
Right.
And then we had been presenting our program. Before we had that was in 2012. I got to go back. No, that's good. In 2012, we had the tournament in the summertime in London, Kentucky. And then, when I first started working for Fish and Wildlife, my job duties initially in 2002 was 50% of my time was going to be outreach, and 50% would be promoting the National or the Kentucky Archery in the Schools program.
Right.
And as our program grew from 22 pilot schools to 1,200 schools, and then I was supervising regional coordinators, and we started out, I think, with 8 coordinators. We went to 9, then we went to 12, and when I left, we were at 14.
Right.
My job became more of an administrator, and I simply didn't have time on Fish and Wildlife's dime to be able to do this outreach program that they had designed the job position to do. Mm. And when I had my final, evaluation, I was basically asked to only focus on the NAS program because there was just too much. I was logging too many hours. I had a ton of comp time. I wasn't using any vacation time, and so I just made a career decision. I said, okay, and I felt like that I had that program in Kentucky. We had been moving it as it was ready for someone else to take it, and I was ready to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm not saying that arrogantly, but I am saying that as a mother hen, I felt extremely confident to turn that program over to someone else and start a new path. And I've never been afraid of job changes. You're looking or talking to a teacher that taught for 12 years, and I left that program, and after working for Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife for 10 years and 11 months, I left that program. And hopefully I will retire before I work 10 years with this one. I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not going to count that in. But anyway, I was not afraid. And then I had a husband that was able to support me during, he supported 100% of everything that I was wanting to do. And, and that's a blessing in itself to have the infrastructure and the support from your family.
Yes. It's very true.
And so I'll remember leaving Fish and Wildlife that day, and there was a group of us that had been talking about how that we desperately needed a program that would take these kids that were not making the after-school teams and guide them into a sport that they're going to be able to continue. And I called a couple of those folks as I was leaving Fish and Wildlife. A couple of weeks later, I made the decision to turn in my resignation, and in December, we formed our 501c, our articles of incorporation and our company, and the rest of it's basically history. We've been moving full speed ahead, and it's been widely accepted, and it's all encompassing, whether it's the type of equipment that the kids use. They can use any bow, any arrow, any accessory, any release, as long as it fits within the division. We made sure that we had divisions that was set up for the traditional archers. Our Olympic recurve shooters have been initially we had traditional class and we had the pins class. The pins class is basically your bow hunting class.
Right.
That's going to have fixed pins and a 12-inch or less stabilizer. This year we added the Olympic recurve, and the reason we did that is we've had so many JOAD clubs and 4-H clubs that said that their Olympic recurve shooters love to shoot 3D, but they didn't have a 3D bow, and they had no venue where they could shoot the Olympic recurve. And then we added an open division with a movable sight and the long stabilizers.
Right.
And that class is catching on pretty good right now. The Olympic recurve is coming up in some states. We're seeing a large amount of participation, and in other states we're not. And it's kind of prevalent that if you have a large JOAD program in your state, then you're probably going to see more Olympic recurve shooters. In Kentucky, we do not have a large recurve division, and we don't have a JOAD. I think we have one active JOAD program in the entire state.
Wow.
So naturally, we do not have any Olympic recurve shooters. So anyway, that's how we designed the program, and instead of regulating the equipment, we standardized the speed limit and the distance that the kids shoot, so that there would be a natural. And then this is the cool part. When we were deciding that this is what we were going to do, I had a meeting with Mike Terrell from ASA, Dee Falk with ASA. He's the National Federation Director, and Loretta Sinclair. And Loretta Sinclair at that time was the president of the U.S. College Archery Program.
Okay.
And the U.S. College Archery Program had a unique problem that they needed some help with. And the problem that they had was their students could not go to an ASA tournament or an IBO tournament or an NFA tournament and find a class where they could fit using the equipment that they used at the collegiate program.
Okay.
So Loretta agreed to change her classes so that they would match with the ASA format.
Okay.
So that college kids at any time could go to an ASA local, regional, state, or national tournament and find a division where they can use the same equipment, same distance, everything was identical. And then we took the Olympic or the college program and we went down one step and we created our high school division. And an example is in our high school division, at the initial, we only had the bow hunter division and our traditional. So our bow hunters could shoot at 30 yards and the speed limit was 260. In the collegiate program, they could shoot 40 yards and their speed limit was 280. And then we kept the middle school at 30 yards for the bow hunting division and the speed limit dropped down to 240. And elementary, they shot at 20 yards. They shoot at 20 yards and their speed limit is 220. So you've got 220 for elementary, 240 for middle school, 260 for our high school, and then you go to college and it's 280.
Right.
And as we've added these different, and the collegiate program has the Olympic recurve division, they have the bow hunter division, and they have the open division.
Okay.
And we made sure that there was a natural progression in those three classes from our program, from elementary, middle school, high school, and on to the collegiate program. And then our kids can find those classes at any ASA event.
So, but like on the school level, so the S3DA are actually clubs that are coming out of the school or archery shops or a
Great
little of
question.
both or?
Well, that's a great question. Right now it's about 35% are school affiliate.
Okay.
And if they are school affiliate, then they can compete as a team and actually get team scholarships. And a perfect example is going to be Boyd County High School from Ashland, Kentucky. At our indoor tournament this past spring, in conjunction with NFAA, they did not have a student on the podium in the high school division for first, second, or third. But because of the team shot so consistently, they beat the other teams there because they had 8 kids that shot really, really well. And so each one of those kids went back with a college scholarship.
Wow.
I think altogether they ended up with $90,000 collectively as a team in scholarships. And so that's the advantage of having a school team, is that they do qualify for team scholarships.
Wow.
And the students that were on the podium, like our first place male in the open division, the Olympic recurve, and the pins class, and our females, the first, second, and third, or first place in each of those divisions, they left there with over $21,000 in college scholarships that was given to them by the universities, and it's a competition where the universities are vying for these top shooters to come to the university and be able to continue the sport.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So, yeah, everybody listen up. If you're at a school and want to start a S3DA club, there's some opportunities here, it sounds like. Isn't that right, Jeannie?
Oh, no doubt about it. At the state tournaments, we had over $300,000 in college scholarships awarded in the indoor. And then we've got 5 state tournaments coming up this weekend, and each of those will have over $300,000 in college scholarships. Then at our national tournament...
What states are they all? They're not just all Kentucky. There's several other states too. Is that it?
Oh yeah. This coming weekend we have the state tournament in Indiana, Kentucky, North Carolina, Georgia, and hang on a minute, Ohio.
Okay.
Cool.
And I think that we had one state tournament last weekend, and there were like 4 different regional tournaments. So the program is moving extremely well. It's pretty exciting. And at our national 3D tournament, the tournament I was talking about earlier was our indoor nationals, and we partnered with NFAA so that in the late winter and early spring, our students can shoot 5 spots. And we have a partnership with NFAA so that our national tournament can be held in conjunction with their indoor nationals that was held in Louisville, Kentucky.
And
we had 6 different states. Yeah, we had 6 different states represented. It was pretty awesome, especially we just signed the contract with NFAA on January the 5th, and Indiana had the first indoor tournament on January the 8th. And what's so crazy is Indiana and their state coordinator, Derek Marshall, is so passionate about our program, and he says Kentucky was first in everything NASC. Indiana is going to be first in everything Scholastic 3D. And I can assure you, in the last 4 years, he has been first in everything that's happened in Indiana.
You know, and I think one of the, this is kind of one of the other group members here said something. You've really got a lot of organizations that have come together for this. This isn't just like S3DA. This is ASA. I'm hearing ASA, USA Archery, NFAA. Yeah, a whole bunch of them. How'd you swing that one? How'd you get them all to come to the table?
Her sweet talk.
Well, we don't have all of them yet, but we do have ASA, and it only makes sense. Our kids are going to local events, which is increasing the local participation. And a lot of states right now are struggling with the number of people showing up for 3D events. And if you go to a state that's got our program and it's active, you're going to see local tournaments like the one I went to this past weekend. There was 158 kids there, and they were competing. And I can remember back in the day going to a 3D tournament in Kentucky, and if you had over 50 or 60 people there, that was a pretty big deal. And we have the Kentucky State Tournament coming up this weekend, and I know that right now they have over 215 kids already pre-registered, and that number is going to just continue to grow. So that's the reason ASA wanted to get on board. And then NFA, the president, Bruce Cole, he and I have been talking about this forever, and he wanted to get on board as well because we have a ton of kids after. But before, I got to tell you something before NFA. We had ASA, and then our next partnership was with Pope and Young. Mm-hmm. And Pope and Young wanted to get on board with our program because we have statistics that show that kids, after doing our program for 3 to 6 months, the percentage of the kids that have their hunting license prior to doing our program is roughly 11.5%. In one state, it actually goes up to 12%. And then after doing our program, that number jumps up to 83.5% in Indiana, 79.8% in Kentucky, 79% in Alabama, and the data is just off the charts. And we've got kids that were videoed on WLEX TV or articles that was in magazines, and these little cute 5th grade girls whispering on video to the news crew, saying how she was pretending she was bow hunting when she was going through the 3D course.
Okay.
When the kids are shooting 3D animals, it's a little different than shooting at a round target. They are visualizing and thinking that they are bow hunting.
Right.
And not only are they thinking that they're bow hunting, these kids want to bow hunt. And we've just had a large number of people wanting to get involved, including, all right, and so we get the kids involved, and then and this is why Pope and Young wanted to be involved. Another reason, we get the kids involved, and then we've got stats that show that within 2 months, that family will have at least one other bow. Most of the time, she actually 1.6 bows, and it's because either mom or dad gets a bow, and or the siblings. And I know hundreds of families right now that they have 2 siblings and mom and dad shooting a bow, and prior to our program, the family was not involved in archery unless they were involved in NASP. And then if they were involved in NASP,
I think we're exceeding the 1.6 number, though. That's what,
yeah, all 3 of us girls definitely exceed the 1.6. But we got our kids into it, too, so.
Yeah, there you go. And I think that number is actually growing because women, and that's going to be the group, and I had a great interview with the local archery shop guy from Saturday's tournament, and he said that it was overwhelming how the kids come in the shop, they purchase their first bow, then one of the parents will buy a bow, and then the kids coming back for an upgrade, whether it be for a release or arrows or a bow, and then he said before you know it, the whole family has purchased a bow.
Right. So yeah, there's even a huge financial benefit for your local archery shops, you know.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. They're laughing all the way to the bank. But in doing that, they are embracing our program, and they are being the mentors to help guide the people into our sport. And so for the hunting aspect is why Pope and Young got on board. And then following Pope and Young, we had our kids that was wanting to bow hunt. Well, then the biggest complaint from our families was after they finished bow hunting, and you know, I bow hunt a lot longer than our kids do. I mean, I'm bow hunting in December and January. Because our season in Kentucky doesn't go out until Martin Luther King Day, the middle of January. Oh. But some of our kids, they don't have the clothing. They're just, you know, it's just not. It's tougher after gun season. So the kids was ready to start shooting archery again. So then the parents started requesting that we would have an indoor league or indoor competition. And that's why we formed the partnership with NFAA.
Right.
And,
that makes sense.
We were able to, and we've had 2 states that had NFAA state tournaments. You know, they were Scholastic 3D indoor tournaments, but we use NFAA rules and regulations. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel if there's already a great model out there. And so that's how we got the partnership with NFAA. And so right now we've got a loop where the kids are shooting indoors in the late fall, winter. They're shooting 3D in the spring and summer. We're pushing them toward bow hunting in the fall, and then repeat, going back indoors. And we have been asked a couple of times about coming up with another program so the kids could have one more venue. And I'm currently working with that with potentially USA Archery or Cabela's. And Cabela's came on board as a major sponsor of our program.
That's fantastic.
That is fantastic.
The brand manager, Jeremy Wonk, actually attended an ASA event with me.
Oh, cool.
And he was so blown away by the kids and every one of them that he talked to. He would just randomly go up and talk to them and ask them if they bow hunt, and every single one of them said yes, except for one little girl, and she said, "No, sir, but if I can get this bow from 35 pounds to 40, Dad's going to let me this year."
Aww, that's great.
Yeah, so anyway, that's some of the driving force of our program is it's all inclusive, and I'm happy with it being all inclusive. It's just it's better for our sport and kids, and it's great for our archery shops, our archery clubs. We have sheriff's departments that's doing our program as part of an outreach program for the community. We got a couple of fire departments doing the program. We have naturally archery clubs. A tremendous number of churches are doing our program and having a large amount of success with it. So, and when we were designing this, we didn't want to limit it to just a school because sometimes schools are hesitant to get involved in a program like this, but that schools are willing to support an after-school initiative, and our program is after school.
Okay.
And the schools can literally hang up banners, or not banners, but flyers, and present the information to the kids so that they can go to a certain location for this after-school activity.
Okay.
And so far, it's been a home run for us.